Hello everyone, today we're considering Python, and today we'll talk about method reassigning in Python and why it can be bad and why it can be good. So let's start. If you don't know anything about method reassigning, so function reassigning, function overriding, then you should watch my previous videos because I explained what is that, why do we need it, how to use it, and so on. And in the previous video, I only talked about magic functions. So I'll talk about magic functions as well as in that one. But you can do it with any function that you want. So for example, if you have two classes, for example, class A and class B, let me just show you class A with a function, I don't know, define, let me actually make class animal, define walk. And then class, for example, dog, which inherits from an animal, and it has walk as well. So now you reassign the function. For example, you print hello, but that's a whole different topic. Today we'll talk about function reassignment for the magic functions only. So in Python we have magic functions or magical functions or internal functions, as you wish to call them, and those functions must be might be very good for your code and might be very bad. Depends on how you use them. And let me just show you. For example, we have class, let me do it like that, class A. So that class A has a magic function, for example, add. So I talked about that function. That function is called when we use object A plus another object A. So when we sum up two objects. And for example, now I'll print hello. Now, as you can see, I don't call that function anywhere. And what's happening? Oh, I don't call the function anywhere, but as you can see, it says hello and then none. Yeah, because I use print. But I don't call that function directly. However, it prints hello because that plus is the function add. So I spoke about that function and some of other functions in the previous video, but now let me focus on another topic. Why those functions can be great and why they may be bad. So you know that in Python we have a lot of libraries, a lot of other things. So for example, we have modules, frameworks, libraries, code of other people. So a lot of things for you to remember. And when you code, you can have two ways of creating a method. First of all, you can create a method with your own name. For example, if we're talking about a queue, what if I want to implement my own queue class? For example, queue, I'll have define init. Again, it's a magical method, but I think everybody knows about it and it's like a common one. And for example, I have self container that has a list, and we can add some things to a queue using function, I don't know, push, for example, push value, which will do self container append value, like that. So that's our queue. I will not write any other functions, but that's our queue. So the first method of writing your code is to really use the real names for your real functions. For example, push, that's the real name. But there is a problem with that way of doing or of styling your classes, of writing your methods, your functions. So the problem is that if you have tons of classes, tons of modules, tons of libraries, and in almost any Python project that is the case, you have to remember a lot of additional things. Of course, if you, for example, only use one library, or if you wrote your code, you know everything about it. But think about that. The other programmer will look at your code and he or she will need to learn everything about that code. So he will need to remember and memorize all of the function names, how all those functions work. And yeah, that's one big problem. However, what if instead of using push, we'll use another function? But let me just not use push. For example, we have push list. So we have container, and then we use self container plus equals container. So if you don't know, in Python we have plus equals sign for the list data type, and when we use it, we just simply concatenate two lists. So we have like a list and we add another list at the end. That's pretty normal. And imagine that you have that function in your code. What if instead of using q dot push list and then using like 1, 2, 3, what if instead of that, and let me just use it like q like that, I will create another object q and q dot push like that. What if instead of using push list, and again you need to memorize that function, you need to understand what it does, you use plus equals. So you use magic function called iadd. As you can see, it still has that other, which can be anything. But what you can do is use if is instance, for example, other list. Then you just simply add that list at the end of your container. So as you can see now, our code is much cleaner. So instead of using push list, append list, add data, add many, we're just simply using plus equals. So for me as a programmer, if I know that I can append some values to queues, of course I need to know what I can do with my class, with my queue class, with all the other classes from other modules and libraries, but I don't need to remember all the function names if I use that method, so with the magic functions. However, there is one problem with those magic functions, but typically, if you write everything correctly, it will be a great benefit for you. Because as you can see now, I don't use any functions, my code is cleaner, and I simply use plus equals. Everybody knows about plus equals, everybody knows what it does. So I expect my queue to add those values at the end. That's just how it works. And yeah, you can totally use that method, and if you do so, then the user of your program, of your code, another programmer, the user of your framework, library, module, he will not suffer as much as he would do with other methods that he will need to remember. If you like simply write push list, add list instead of iadd and all of the other magic functions. So if you can, you should omit all of the a lot of function names. Of course, if you can. However, there is another problem when we're talking about magic functions. So, as I said, your code will be cleaner, it will be much more comfortable to work with, it will be more beautiful, but only if you write everything correctly. So what do I mean by correctly? As I said, I said that I know that plus equals does something. So plus equals in my case adds a list at the end of my class. However, what did I do here? Or what I did here? Here I used iadd to add a list, and that's normal. But what if I use iadd instead of push? So like iadd instead of push, like that. So what is the problem now? What is the problem with that? And for example, I push only one value. What is the problem with that? Well, actually, there is one big problem, and you cannot really say that it's a problem. It depends on your class. But in our case, we know that Q is a container. So every container in Python, which is mutable, so mutable means that we can change the value of an object. And every container which is mutable in Python has plus equals operation, as far as I remember. Well, of course, okay, let's talk about list. So list in Python have plus equals operation. And if I use iadd, so as I did right here, what I want to do is really just add a container at the end of my queue in our case. However, as you can see here, instead of using plus equals, I use append. What does that mean? That means that I will not add a container if I use plus equals. I'll add a value. That means that the behavior of our plus equals and iadd methods will be different from what other people are used to. What do I mean by that? For example, if you worked with booleans, you know that every boolean, when you use it, for example, true or false, should give you either, so or should give you either true or false, depending on the statement. So if, for example, true or false will give us true. But what if, instead of doing that, I write q or q, q or q, and we also have define or method, and what if instead of that I would just print hello? So as you can see now, instead of using or returning true or false, so boolean value at the or magic function, we just simply print hello. Or what if we return, for example, return 1 minus 10? So what I mean by that is that you should not make magic functions as you make all the other ones. So really think that another user will use your magic function. And actually there are rules for writing magic functions in Python. So if you watched my previous video, then you know that, for example, in add method, so just a normal add, it's like a plus a in our case. We need to create a new object, but in iadd we need to update our current object, so self. That means that if you want to reassign magic functions, what you need to do is think about their usage. So don't try to make them like your unique functions, because magic functions are not unique. They are really common for all the developers, for all of the modules, for all of the Python programmers, so for the whole community. And if you make your magic functions with very unique meaning, with very unique outcome, then that means that you confuse everyone. So that's why a lot of programmers don't like magic functions. For example, in C++, it says that you should never reassign functions. Create your own ones, because it led to a lot of problems with classes, it led to a lot of confusion, problems, and so on. But in Python, we can actually do that. Again, it can lead to a lot of confusions, and a lot of programmers don't advise that. But I think that those are really great as long as you follow the rules. So for example, if you want to make a container and you want to add, so append something, instead of using iadd, what you can do is literally use append, because in Python everybody knows that append adds a value, because append function is used inside of a list, so inside of an internal Python structure. So if you can, you should avoid magic functions, but don't try to avoid them every time you have some very common logic. For example, adding a container at the end of your own container. So for example, plus equals, and again it depends. For example, if that was not a queue but a number, for example, of course plus equals would add a number, but you need to really think about what you're making. So if you're making a container, add a list with plus equals. And again, what you can do is use append to add value at the end, or use prepend to add the value at the front of your container. So really think about your functions. And if you're not sure, then probably it's best for you to create just a normal function in Python. For example, add values, because that way everybody knows that that's your own function and you can do whatever you want with that function. So yeah, that is the first two problems, or that is one advantage and one disadvantage with using magic functions in Python. So use them, but use them carefully. The second advantage is the protocol structure. So I don't know, I actually forgot about that, but I think there is a design pattern called protocol. I don't really know right now, but yeah, I think that's protocol or skeleton, something like that. I think it's protocol. So what does that mean? That means that you have the same interface, but you have different classes. So for example, imagine that we have a code, for example, define some func, and we have a container in here, container, and we don't really know what that container is going to be. So what we can do is use container.append 1, and then container dot plus equals 1, 2, 3, and then container I don't know what to do, but container equals I don't know, container equals 0, 9, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, something like that. So what are we doing right here? And let's return that. This is just some boilerplate code, but some function accepts a container. But we don't really know if that it's going to be a list or anything else. So when we call that function inside of our main clause, so if name equals main, I think you know about it. I use it a lot of times, so I'm not going to explain it right now. But typically, okay, I'll explain it once again. So name, it's like a name of the package in Python, and if you run your package with Python main.py or Python 5.py, then the file that you're running is going to have a name, like name variable set to main. So that means that you're really running that file. You do not import it to any other file. So in our case, what we can do is add here a list. So for example, 1 to 3. Then we use 1 to 3, 1 to 3. So that code works perfectly with the list. But what if at some point we need to change all of the lists in our code to our own queues? So for example, queue from just nothing. As you can see, I use append plus equals functions in here. And what I can do is literally just use the same functions in my queue class. So for example, I add, then let's self container plus equals other, and we need to return self container. Actually, yeah, we need to return self container. It's not mandatory, but we need to return it. And then we need to use eq. So eq means equal for that operation. And what we can do is use return self container equals other. So yeah, that's kind of it. And as you can see right now, our code in some function will perfectly work because we have append function here, we have iadd function here, so plus equals, and we have eq, so equals function in here. So that means that we can literally change all of our list structures to queues. Therefore, we can just change at the class if we need to, add some magic functions, add some common functions like append, and after that everything will work. But of course, again, you need to follow the rules about, not the rules, but you need to really think about your class. So what your class will do. In our case, queue is a container. Of course, append will append a value. iadd will add some values at the end. And eq will check if our classes are equal or not, or objects are equal or not. Yeah, that's kind of it. So in our case, some function can literally be a list or any other class that has all of those methods assigned. And in our case, if we are using magic functions, that's a really great opportunity for us because we don't need to really use a lot of append and other types of functions because it can be really different for different objects. For example, we have queue, and in queues we often use push at the end. For example, in JavaScript, when we are talking about arrays at all, we use push. And what if I don't want to use push in my own class? I want to use something where we like add value or append value or my own name, you know? Then, of course, what I can do is use magic functions. But again, you need to use them very carefully because in case of append, there is no magic function that works as append, you know? There's no magic functions that will literally add a value to your container. Because in Python lists, there is an append function that adds one value. Again, it depends on your class, on the aim of your class, but typically, what you can do is, not typically, but what you can do is use or assign all the functions with the unique names like append, clear to your own, so reassign those functions as you want. For example, append, self-other, you're literally doing the same append right here for the self-container list inside of our queue class. But when we're talking about plus equals, it's really easy for you because you know that, okay, I don't want to make append. What if, for example, I want to make add? And if your class, for example, another class, you used numpy, but then you switched to pandas. Okay, those are really different libraries, but for example, you used Flask and then you switch to Fast API. And what if your classes, all of your classes, really have magic methods? What does that mean? That means if a lot of logic is inside of magic methods, then you cannot change your code at all. So in case of appends, typically you have to change your code, but append is a really nice name, so a lot of classes may use it as well. So there are like common functions like clear, append, I don't know, maybe, yeah, those are the ones that I can think of right now, but like common names for all of the same classes. But that the common functions like append, I don't know, equal, clear, all of that functions, you can use them as well in your code. And if somebody will use your code or your library or your module or your framework, they will know that that function with the common name does the same thing that the other function in the other module with that specific name does. For example, append adds a value at the end of your container. Again, it really depends on the aim of your class, but if you don't want to make a lot of append, clear, all the functions, you want your unique names, what you can do is use magic functions. Of course, again, use them carefully. So use them as they were designed to use. Don't just use iadd in order to print out your list, But if you can do it, and you use like plus equals 1 to 3 instead of using like add many, it will be better for your code. Because now, if I change my queue here to a list, for example, container, just a normal list like 1, 2, 3. Then after that, of course, I'll have all the functions that I needed in that all the magic functions will work. So I will not need to change all of my code. I only need to change the parts that really have different function names. But in case of magic functions, they are all the same. So these are literally the operators in Python. So that's what I meant. I hope that video will help you. So yeah, you need to really understand what I meant during that video. Like, you need to use magic functions, but you need to use them carefully, because there are a lot of moments when you can really use them incorrectly. And typically, it's better for you to omit magic functions at all, because they are not as you can go in a lot of trouble with magic functions, because again, there are rules on how to write them. For example, iadd self-container plus equals other. You cannot create another container, so another queue in iadd, because that's iadd, so that's in place addition. You need to change like that container. You don't need to create another one. That's not how it works. And all of those things. So yeah, but again, it's Python. You can do whatever you want because it's Python. Yeah, it's not C++ when you can literally burn your whole PC. But use them carefully. And of course, watch my other videos where I explain how to use them, and subscribe to my channel. Leave a like. Thank you and good luck.